The pilgrimage of the cross, John mentioned that at the start. Devotion to the saints, particularly young saints. Music festivals. A serious look at what God might want me to do with my life. Vocational discernment. And also renewed action for social service and justice outreach. Rowan mentioned he came with this in Vincent de Paul group. And other groups are being enriched because you're coming back from wherever you've been in World Youth Day and you're wanting to get involved, particularly where you hear the whisper of Jesus shout out in the poor and the marginalised. I've also, another point that I see is a hallmark of what's happening, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne here, they're the two that I was involved with, is the way we're accommodating the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander dimension in the church here in Australia. That's something new, and I think we've made major steps in the last couple of months. Just the way the Pope, for instance, was welcomed by the Aboriginal, the interest he showed, the way there's an Aboriginal mate of mine called Matty Shields. He's a young guy, and he was so proud up there on the papal boat. I could see him, I was on the papal boat, I could see him up there right next to his mate Benedict XVI. And he was pointing out different places there as the boat was going by, and the Pope was listening to this young Aboriginal guy, all painted up. And I thought, oh, gee, I wish I took could get a photograph of that, because there's a great, I mean, here we are 220 years later, not the Europeans coming in, but here's the first time that this Pope Benedict XVI has ever come to this country, and he's been pointed out the sites by the original inhabitants, and how natural that is. I mean, we've got to sort of accommodate, not having Aboriginal people on the outside looking in, but they're our first Australians, and to honour them. Not in a way that's sort of, quirky or just sort of patronising them or being tokenistic, but it's just something natural. It's part of being a Catholic here, is to make sure that our first Catholic Australians are there. Parishes becoming more and more engaged. I mentioned that one. Another one, the migrant groups. I noticed some of my Vietnamese friends here. The huge energy that came from, but is coming from migrant groups in Melbourne is one of the big observations I've made. For the last 2.5 years I've been totally soaked in the youth apostolate here in Melbourne, and I'd say that the youth apostolate is so strong in the migrant people, particularly our Vietnamese friends, but then the Filipinos, the Polish. I mean, I was invited to a big Chinese gathering, and there's people from Hong Kong and mainland China here in Melbourne that formed a big community in Wattle Park, and the energy that comes from that. I knew that they were there, but I had no idea that they were as strong, and they're growing, so proud of their faith. I believe it to the extent to say, and I know this is a bit over the top to say this, but I think the new youth evangelisers of Melbourne are coming from our migrant communities more than anywhere else. So, in the past we sort of think, when I was growing up, we say, oh, what can we do to help the migrants? But really the question's around the other, what can the migrants do to help us? In fact, we're all migrants, apart from our first Australians, the Aborigines. So I look to the future with great hope, with the tremendous new generation of youth coming across the board, but particularly from our migrant people. The last thing I just want to say before I move on to the second part of the talk is I hope, because this has all happened in Australia this time, that World Youth Day becomes something normal for young people to get involved in. I think it should be normal for a young Catholic person to go to at least one World Youth Day. Whether they become junkies with 3 or 4 of them going, I don't know. But at least to go to one. It is a life-changing experience. We've had more go up to Sydney than any other time. I think when I went to Cologne there were 350, I think 400 young people from Melbourne. But then we had, we had almost up to 20,000 from Melbourne. Maybe 10,000 registered, but we also had thousands go up that didn't register, they just went up. And lots of young people went up, I know, with families, and they just appeared there. But it's very hard to put a number. We also had up to 20,000 of our own international guests there going up, and we all know about the logistics and the losing of luggage and all that sort of business. But I mean, that's part of being a pilgrim, isn't it? Isn't it? Come on, isn't it, huh? Yeah, pilgrim, that's okay, all right. You're not too convinced about that, okay. All right, but wouldn't it be great, say in another 20 years' time we look back and say, oh, it's just normal, it's sort of like taking the gap year, or it's sort of just, going, rather than just it's normal to go up to Service Paradise after your year 12 for, Schoolies Week. It's just normal to go for a World Youth Day experience, wherever it is around the world. So I think if we can get that going as part of the normal reaction, rather than just a token group. I suppose in the past, World Youth Day has sometimes been seen as sort of right-wing, and all. Forget about that right-wing and left-wing. That's not something that you people talk about, as the older people talk about it. That's their problem, not your problem. But you great people, you wonderful people, because of your enthusiasm in the large time, you brought World Youth Day over the last few months into the centre of Catholic life here in Australia. And I don't think we can be the same in the future because of that. So I really thank you. You are doing a great job on behalf of Australians. One of the bishops of Australia wanted to come particularly tonight to thank you so much. The second part of my talk now, I just want to talk about what are we going to do now then. Well, I mean, Australians are very pragmatic, and I don't want to get into that pragmatism. The Archbishop has set up a new structure. Teresa Wilson will take charge of it, but Tiffany, you're going to be a part of it. Tiffany, would you mind just coming up here and telling us about this new structure? You know more about it than me now. Bishop Prowse is sort of moving out of the youth apostolate and moving into other things. Bishop Costello, who's got a real love of youth, and because I've been a Salesian and professional understanding of it, and so he's going to take over the broad panorama of the leadership. But we've got a great group. So who's in the group, and basically, is there something in October we need to know about?
Thank you, Bishop Prowse. As Bishop Prowse mentioned, there is a new Archdiocesan Office for Youth that's been put into place. It's headed by Teresa Wilson. I'm sure many of you know her. She had lunch with the Pope, so that's something she's got in her experience. Blair McWhinney, who also worked on the Journey of the Cross and Icon, myself, John Reinhardt and Tim Davis will be working on the Office for Youth, and just making sure that I myself went to World Youth Day, and I went with my pilgrimage group, and it was my first World Youth Day, and it was such a huge experience, and it's just something that it can't just be left there in July. It's got to be, you've got to sort of continue living on World Youth Day, and that's what we hope to do, work with all the other youth offices and parishes, and make sure that there is something that will live on for Australian youth. Bishop Prowse mentioned that in October there is going to be an event. So far we haven't officially termed it anything yet, but we're calling it the Pilgrimage to St. Patrick's Cathedral. Our hope is that coming from World Youth Day, obviously you can't recreate that special experience, but we would like to celebrate the many youth and young people and old people as well that went to World Youth Day and experienced that for themselves, and we want to sort of share that as an archdiocese. So on the 5th of October, that's a Sunday, we hope that you'll all be there. Groups are meeting in their parishes and sort of get together and meet and come to the parish, come to the cathedral, and we'll celebrate Mass there, and there's a bit of pre-Mass entertainment, and we hope that you all enjoy just being together and celebrating what we've established here for ourselves and what we can do in the future. So I think Bishop Prowse put it earlier, that year 10 student who shared her experience. There's so many young people out there that probably are still trying to understand what they experienced, and that's something that we hope that we can all build on and share with one another. So.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, they're very good speakers here, aren't they? I mean, unbelievable. And Tiffany did a fantastic job there. She comes from a Filipino background, and we're so proud of Tiffany. She really was so helpful to us over the last few months. And it was lovely going into the office. It was always a big smile from Tiffany. So there's some practical things, but on the local level, well, it's up to you. Put your hand up if you belong to a parish or community where some new life or something new is happening as a result of World Youth Day. Could you just put your hand up if there's something new happening in your areas? No, I'm not going to call you up. It's all right. Don't worry. No, put your hand. No, I'm not going to call you up. Don't worry. I was going to say there should be more than 3 or 4. No, truly, I won't call you up. But I'd like to know if there's been a little bit of fresh, a new group or something new's happening in your parish or community. Yeah. Okay, well, that's the vast majority. There's something going on there. And that's the way it should be.